The History of Poland, Episode 22. A Closer Look at Repentance. Hello and welcome back. Last time we left off with Bolesław leaving Bohemia firmly defeated. This time, let's start with a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you have a brother. This brother has lived with you off and on over the years, but has caused more trouble than anything else. They've crossed the line once or twice, and you've had to kick them out, but eventually you let them come back in. Yet, time and time again, they treat your home like it's theirs, and your rules as if they were nothing more than hot air. Finally, you get fed up. You kick them out for what you think is the last time. They leave and go and stay with some friends of theirs, but lo and behold, the friends decide to help your brother in his schemes to break into your house and make it their own. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but continuing on, you can't allow this, so you go to a judge. The judge looks over the details of your case, and after a studied period of thought, rules that your brother has an equal right to be in your house. No, they won't own it, but you at least have to let them stay with you. What do you do in this situation? For most of us, we'd probably be wary and follow the adage of trust but verify. We'd let them stay and following the legal agreement, but we would make sure to keep a close eye on things. We don't want a repeat of past behavior. I bring this up not because I want to talk about sibling dynamics for the next 20 minutes, but instead because the scenario I just outlined bears striking similarities to the one that Bolesław faced in the early 12th century. You see, after Bolesław defeated the Bohemians, there were peace talks. Nothing so grand as actually pushing for peace between these oft-hostile neighbors, but something that would turn down the heat in the region. On Bolesław's side, he pushed for Władysław to accept Sobieslaw. Sobieslaw is Borovoy's younger brother, back in Bohemia. Władysław agreed to this, and it granted some of the hereditary lands of Sobieslaw back to him, specifically the lands of Zatek, according to Kosmas's Chronicle of the Czechs. Yet, what's life without symmetry, and what's a deal if only one side gives? Gallus tells us that following Sobiesław's return to Bohemia, Zbigniew sent word that he wanted to come back to Poland. Before we get to Gallus's account, let's just remember that these events are very close in time to when Gallus is writing all of this down. In fact, there's some speculation that Gallus was a first-hand witness to all of the crazy things that are about to happen. Yes, this episode is a little crazy. As Gallus tells us, quote, "Thereupon Zbigniew sent an embassy to his brother Bolesław, humbly pleading to grant to him too some small part of their paternal inheritance, as the Duke of the Czechs had to his brother. He accepted the condition that he should not be his equal in any respect, but would always obey him as a knight his lord in every regard. For now he believed that neither Emperor, Czechs, nor Pomeranians could help him prevail, but what by strength of arms he could not obtain, he might hope to gain by humility and a brother's love." End quote. Well, that is a touching sentiment of Zbigniew wanting to come back to Poland, and the scenario I outlined at the beginning of this episode makes a little bit more sense. If you're in Bolesław's shoes, you have a brother who has betrayed you, rebelled against you, fought in civil wars against you, and tried to usurp your authority, nearly at every turn. I mean, this isn't just once, but many times over the course of many years. What would you do? I'm not even sure what I would do if I was in a similar situation. Do you let them come back in? Or do you say, no, you're not welcome here, stay in Bohemia, good luck? To complicate matters further, this isn't just a dispute between two people. Rather, this is a decision that, if things go awry again, potentially hundreds of people will die in the resulting conflict. People who are dependent on you as their feudal overlord. It's a whole extra element of pressure that would be truly difficult to deal with. It's not a situation I'd like to find myself in, that's for sure. We'll never know what Bolesław was thinking when he heard of this plea. I think it's safe to say that at the very least he thought this over quite deeply, but Gallus does give us a window into how he responded. Gallus tells us that, quote, "When Bolesław had word of his brother's most humble plea, Bolesław overlooked all the perjuries he had committed and all the injuries he had inflicted, all the times he had brought foreign nations into Poland. He softened his anger and let Zbigniew return to Poland." His terms were these: if the humility of his mind was in keeping with the words of his envoys, and he would regard himself as a knight and not as lord, nor make display of any pride or lordship in future, out of brotherly love he would give him certain castles, and if he could see in him true humility and true love, he would always advance him daily and every day. But if he concealed in his heart that ancient divisive pride, then open discord would be better than bringing back new sedition to Poland again." End quote. All right, so those are Bolesław's terms. They're pretty simple. First, if Zbigniew would remain humble and not try to present himself as Bolesław's equal, then he would give him a position inside Poland. This makes a bit of sense. I mean, Zbigniew clearly does have some skill in leading armies and in overseeing territory, but Bolesław also doesn't want to have him come in and try to be an equal, but, he could probably use some of Zbigniew's talents. The second condition is that he would be considered a knight and not a lord, to make it clear that he had no right to his position, but was merely serving at the pleasure of Bolesław. Third, that he not try to move up the ladder and gain more authority. In exchange for abiding by these terms, Bolesław would not only allow Zbigniew back in Poland, but promise to promote him in line with his good behavior. It's sort of like parole with perks. Now Gallus tells us that, quote, "Zbigniew gave in to the advice of fools," which I personally think is an understatement. I mean, if you were coming back home purely on the good graces of somebody who has complete authoritarian control over territory, you probably want to at least begin by appearing humble and meek. Even if you aren't humble and meek, I mean, come on, first impressions matter. But Gallus tells us that Zbigniew did not do that. He says, quote, "Zbigniew recalled not at all his promises of submission and humility. His approach to Bolesław was not humble, but arrogant. He behaved not like a man whom long exile had punished and toils and hardship had worn out, but indeed like a lord, with a sword carried before him, and a band of musicians playing drums and cithers ahead. He indicated that he would not be coming to serve, but to rule. He made it as if he would not be a knight at his brother's command, but his brother's lord and master." End quote. This is not a great way to kick things off. But then, according to Gallus, the situation gets even worse. Gallus tells us that some men decided to stir up rumors about Zbigniew, and in essence told Bolesław that it was only a matter of time until Zbigniew rebelled. There's no indication of who these guys were or why they decided to point the finger at Zbigniew. The only hint from Gallus is that they weren't being entirely forthright in their accusations. But my personal guess is that they saw Zbigniew as a rival for power. Maybe they were afraid he would be granted lands that they currently occupied, maybe they thought he would gain the trust of Bolesław, or maybe they were on the Pomeranian border and were afraid that Zbigniew's long-standing friendship with the locals would mean raiding had to stop. I don't know. It's not clear why they spoke up, but when they did not pull punches. Gallus tells us that, quote, "This man, tried by so many calamities and having suffered such a long exile, arrives at the outset in such height of pride when he is still uncertain of any single thing. What will he do in the future if he is granted some degree of power over the kingdom of Poland?" They asserted another even more dangerous thing, that he, namely Zbigniew, had already found and commissioned someone of whatever origin, rich or poor, who having determined a place suitable for him, would stab Bolesław with a dagger or some other iron object, and he would then raise this murderer to a place of high honor as one of the princes if he should at that moment escape the threat to his life. End quote. So not only is Zbigniew just waiting to rebel, according to these men, but he is also plotting the assassination of Bolesław. Not just plotting the assassination, but he's saying, anybody who can assassinate Bolesław, I will reward them, and if, after you stab him, you escape with your life, I will make you a noble. So that is quite the accusation. Gallus, though, has no patience for these accusations and declares that in his view, the accusations were fabrications, and that if anyone was plotting a crime, it was these guys, not Zbigniew. Not to say that Zbigniew was totally innocent, because according to Gallus, he did come in with lots of pomp and circumstance, but Gallus sees that as a crime of the wrong attitude, not necessarily a crime of fratricide. Unfortunately, it seems that bad advice from people was all over the place. Not just with Bolesław, but with Zbigniew's retainers as well. Apparently, while it may have been unlikely that Zbigniew was plotting the immediate assassination of Bolesław, he was acting up a little bit. One of the key moments that seems to have made Bolesław suspicious of Zbigniew was his showing up at a service that was reserved only for lords, not for knights. Yet Zbigniew did show up, and in the process may have been signaling that he really was lord of half of Poland, just like in the early days. This could have just been a social faux pas, but it seems like it may have been an intentional move on Zbigniew's part to say, I'm moving up the ladder a little bit. If that is what Zbigniew thought, I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, he's been leading armies into Poland at the right hand of not just the Holy Roman Emperor, but also the continual enemies of the Poles, the Bohemians. Sure, one of his loyal friends is Martin, the Archbishop of Gniezno, but even if all of his Polish advisors are telling him to stake his claim to the lands he used to rule, I don't know why he would believe them. I mean, up to this point in time, all of their advice has been absolute rubbish. But Zbigniew did appear to be a bit haughty, and in reaction to this, and following the advice of some men, Bolesław blinded Zbigniew. This is a very pivotal moment, not just in the life of Zbigniew, who is now blind, but also Bolesław. Now, the exact method of blinding was either poking out the eyes with a red-hot iron, or possibly cutting the eyes out of the head. Either way, gruesome and painful. The situation surrounding the blinding isn't clear here. We don't know where it happened, we don't know how it happened, we don't know of the exact time it happened, but we do know two things. One is that Bolesław was responsible for the blinding, and two, he really shouldn't have blinded his brother. I mean, it's one thing to fight back against someone in rebellion against you, or even to expel them from your lands, or to scold them for their haughty attitude. It's another thing to blind your half-brother on the off chance he might rebel. What follows is what I'm going to guess is one of the low points of Bolesław's life. You see, there was a very strong backlash against the blinding of Zbigniew. The backlash fell into a couple of groups. First, there were Zbigniew's supporters, who condemned the action and pushed strongly for some sort of reprisal against Bolesław. Second, there was the public reaction, which, being inflamed with passion on the subject due to Zbigniew's vocal supporters, were suddenly a bit put off by Bolesław's actions. Combined, these two sources made it possible for the clergy in Zbigniew's camp, most likely though not definitively the Archbishop of Gniezno, Martin, to excommunicate Bolesław. We've talked in the past, in the episode about the investiture controversy, about the act of excommunication. It's pretty brutal for leaders during this time. It allows subjects to disregard the commands of their overlords, it lets vassals do what they will, and it dramatically weakens the power base of any lord who draws some sort of legitimacy from their relationship with Rome. Now, we don't have the exact documents of the excommunication of Bolesław, so there may have been different consequences for him, but those are generally consequences that you find when a lord is excommunicated. Gallus, though, tells us that Bolesław quickly realized the error of his ways and began the process of repenting. Describing Bolesław's repentant form, Gallus tells us that, quote, "We have seen such a man, such a prince, such a favored youth fasting from the beginning of Lent, ever prostrate on the earth in sackcloth and ashes, washed in tearful sighs, bereft of human company and conversation, regarding the earth as his table, grass as his tablecloth, black bread as fine fare, and water as nectar." End quote. In addition to his fasting and penitent attitude, Bolesław also acted generously towards the public at large. Gallus tells us that, quote, "He himself had masses celebrated and psalms sung each day for sinners and the dead, and exhibited great works of mercy in feeding and clothing the poor." End quote. Then, in an act that went beyond the repentance itself, Bolesław also sought the forgiveness of Zbigniew. Yes, Zbigniew is still alive at this point in time and seems to just be hanging out. Bolesław sought that forgiveness and apparently received it, which, on just my perspective, is a great credit to Zbigniew's character. Sure, he kept trying to resist his brother's rule, but in the end he forgave him for the blinding. That's something. As his next act of penance, Bolesław did something truly extraordinary. He left Poland. Yeah, during a time when his grip on power was not especially strong, when he was still technically in a state of hostilities with Pomerania and the Holy Roman Empire, and when he was excommunicated, he up and left his territory entirely. Gallus describes it as, quote, "For although he ruled not a duchy, but a magnificent kingdom, and had to fear from diverse enemy nations, Christian and pagan alike, He commended himself and his realm to the care of God's power, and with deepest devotion undertook a journey of pilgrimage." End quote. Now, just in case you think this was some sort of quick jaunt over the border into Bohemia or something along those lines, you would be mistaken. Instead, Bolesław left Poland and entered Hungary, where he visited the Abbey of St. Giles. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different right now. If you look at your phone right now, you'll see a little map I put together. Yeah, I didn't know you could put pictures into podcast episodes, but apparently you can. And if your exact podcast player doesn't support this, you can see this map on the website, historyofpolandpodcast.com. But anyway, if you look at the map, you'll see a map of modern-day Europe. Highlighted is the distance Bolesław would have had to travel to get to the abbey. Ignoring the borders, because they're modern-day borders, you can see that if he left from Krakow, not guaranteed, but theoretically possible, we don't know his origin city at this point, he would have had to travel hundreds of miles across a mountain range and deep into Hungarian territory to reach the abbey. Remember, this is not some sort of military invasion or journey that he's going to come back with plunder from. He in all likelihood came back poorer than when he left because he brought plenty of gifts to give away along the way. Now, I'm going to change the picture quickly and show you where he went, since the ruins of the abbey in Hungary are still around. These are the ruins. This abbey was an offshoot of the St. Giles Abbey in France. At this location, Gallus tells us that while he was there, he, quote, "would have fasted, satisfied with taking only bread and water, had the wisdom of the bishops and abbots in view of such tribulation not interrupted this fast by masses and prayers and the indulgence of mercy. Every day, too, he would walk from his hostel, often barefoot, with the bishops and chaplains so long till he completed the canonical hours of the Perpetual Virgin, the 7 penitentiary psalms with a litany, and added most of the entire sequence of the Psalter after the vigil for the dead. Moreover, during the entire course of that pilgrimage, he was so devoted and diligent in washing the feet of the poor and giving out alms that no needy person requesting his mercy would leave without receiving it." End quote. On this pilgrimage, Bolesław didn't entirely neglect his position as ruler of Poland. He does have responsibilities, after all. So he met with Koloman, the king of Hungary, along with many other Hungarian leaders. He left gifts and used this as an opportunity to bolster the relationship, something that seemed to work quite well. Now, I'm just spitballing here real quick, but this could have been sort of a backup plan for Bolesław. I mean, if this excommunication isn't lifted, if he loses power in Poland, at least he can go seek refuge in Hungary, which is a pretty standard move on the part of a lord in this time period who is not in power anymore. That's speculation entirely on my part, so take it or leave it. To sum up this chapter in Bolesław's life, Gallus tells us that, quote, "Bolesław returned from his pilgrimage with such spiritual devotion, with such temporal veneration, yet once back in his own country he did not give up the life of a penitent and a habit of a pilgrim. Rather, he persevered in the plan of pilgrimage as far as the grave of the blessed martyr Adalbert, intending to celebrate the feast of Easter. And as he came daily the closer to the place of the holy martyr, ever more devotedly he proceeded, with tears and prayers and on bare feet. And when he had reached the city and the grave of the holy martyr, how many alms he gave to the poor, how many treasures he presented in the church and on the altars is evidenced materially by the golden object which Bolesław had made for the holy martyr's relics in witness of his devotion and penitence. For in that shrine there are 80 marks of purest gold, besides pearls and precious stones, hardly less valuable than the gold. And regarding his bishops, princes, chaplains, and countless warriors, he celebrated that most glorious Holy Easter in such a magnificent and munificent way that every one of the greater men, and almost all the lesser ones, received precious garments. Regarding the canons of the Holy Martyr, and the guardians and the servitors of the church, as well as the citizens of the town, he made such generous provision that all, without exception, were honored either by vestments or horses or other gifts, each according to his rank and estate. Thus was the pilgrimage completed with such religious devotion." End quote. So, Bolesław is back in good standing with the church, and the people seem to be more enthralled with him than before the blinding. This was an excellent crisis communications public relations exercise, as we would call it nowadays. Yet, before we move on still further, we need to say a quick farewell to Zbigniew. For someone who has been such a mainstay of this podcast for the last 5 or 10 episodes, he does not get a very detailed conclusion. Yes, I know for the Zbigniew fan club out there, this is disappointing, but it's the reality. What historians seem to agree upon is that he died shortly after this incident, which, to be perfectly honest, is not too hard to believe after a violent eye removal. Zbigniew had ruled part of Poland for a good chunk of time, had tried to follow in the footsteps of his father Władysław, but ultimately did not prove the martial equal of his half-brother Bolesław. And with that, we say farewell, Zbigniew. Yet there's one more note to make about this period of time, which is that this was not the only thing going on in Poland at the time. No, tensions were high between Poland and Pomerania, and war was about to break out once more, which is something that we're going to bring our attention to next time. In fact, next time we'll be covering a subject that I've neglected diving into for too long. Yes, we're going to be talking at length about Poland's northern neighbors. As always, thank you for listening. If you have any comments about me including pictures in the episode, if that's something you like or didn't like, please let me know. I can put those in more in the future. I can leave them out if nobody cares about them. And if you'd like to support the creation of the podcast, you can donate at patreon.com/historyofpolandpodcast. As an extra benefit, you're going to get extra episodes occasionally. I'm still working out the exact schedule, but they come in dribs and drabs. If you can't spare the change, you can always leave a review on the various podcast apps or follow along on both Twitter and Facebook by searching for the History of Poland podcast. The last thing I want to bring up is that I've been thinking about including some recommendations for Polish history related material and services. These are things that I don't create, but which for people who maybe are going to Poland on a vacation or who want to know more about Polish history might find fascinating. It wouldn't totally fit in with the plot of the stories, just because it's not going to tie in one-to-one, but it's something that I think people might find valuable. If you're interested in that, I'd love to hear. If you're just strongly opposed to that, I would also like to hear that, because I don't want to offend anybody with including things that aren't the history of Poland exactly, in quotes. But anyway, that's just something that I'm considering doing, and I'd love to hear any feedback about that before I start including that in episodes. With that, I will say thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.